Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, from their earliest exiles to the deeply ingrained memories of resistance flowing through their veins, a time when prayers echoed off stone, when arguments could last longer than sieges, and when one hesitant historian found himself caught between a scroll and a sword. So, before you tuck in and let your mind wander, maybe leave a like. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, feel free to subscribe. Quietly, of course, and hey, where are you listening from? Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Galilee smells faintly of crushed sage and sweat, not the romantic kind, but the kind that clings to wool tunics after a long, unintentional march. You trudge up a chalky path, your sandals losing their will to argue with the gravel. In the distance, a goat bleats indignantly, as if it, too, objects to the heat. Josephus is 29. The locals already call him Yosef ben Mattatyahu, but Roman scrolls will soon pin him with a heavier name: traitor, historian, survivor, depending on who you ask. Right now, though, he's mostly just tired. He didn't want this job. Appointed commander of the Galilee by a Jerusalem council more skilled in lofty speeches than swordplay, Josephus finds himself surrounded by peasants who think rebellion sounds more exciting than it smells. And rebellion, it turns out, smells like poorly tanned leather, desperation, and slightly scorched barley. He walks among them, part general, part rabbi, part walking contradiction. His hands are soft from scrolls, not calloused from shields. You imagine him adjusting his robes awkwardly, trying to look more decisive than he feels. If charisma were a weapon, he might have stood a chance. But Galilee is preparing for war, and Josephus is preparing footnotes. That's not to say he lacks talent. He has a memory like a trapdoor. Once something falls in, it doesn't escape. He can recite Torah, Aristotle, and the family tree of the Hasmonean kings without blinking. Just don't ask him to lift a sword, unless it's metaphorical, and preferably sheathed in a thesis. There's an old woman in Tiberias who claims she saw his future in a cracked oil lamp. She says it flickered 3 times when he passed her stall, which means he will live, but forget who he is. Or possibly he will eat figs at an awkward time. Her Aramaic is a little slippery. You've met women like her, half prophet, half pest, entirely certain. The scholarly debate begins even before the Romans arrive. Some argue Josephus was sent to Galilee to unify the rebel towns. Others insist he was a pawn, a fall guy for a failed strategy dreamed up in Jerusalem's echo chamber of sages and senators. A few fringe theories, whispered in the more cynical circles, suggest he volunteered just to write about it later. A bit like volunteering to captain a sinking boat so you can publish the ship's memoirs. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: Galilee doesn't unite. Cities like Sepphoris secretly negotiate with Rome, others like Gamla sharpen knives under their mattresses. Josephus is left trying to herd ideology like its sheep, and these sheep have very strong opinions. You pass a makeshift outpost near Yodfat. 2 boys no older than 15 practice with slings, their aim questionable, their resolve not. They shout something about freedom. You note their slings are made from frayed tzitzit, the fringes of a prayer shawl. Holy threads now launching stones. That's the mood here, theology turned tactical. At night, Josephus scribbles on parchment by olive oil lamp, the scent of smoke curling into his beard. He tries to balance facts with survival. He knows the Romans are coming. He's met Vespasian. Not exactly at a dinner party, but close enough to smell the military precision. Vespasian doesn't talk much, but his silence carries weight. You don't negotiate with someone who trims his beard like a general. Josephus writes about lineage, miracles, politics. He avoids personal reflections, but occasionally, a soft lament slips between the lines, like a scribe coughing in a quiet library. He remembers his mother humming Esha's chale while peeling garlic for Shabbat stew. He wonders if she still does. One night, near the Sea of Galilee, a wind stirs the reeds. It brings the scent of thyme and salt and something faintly metallic, anticipation, maybe. Josephus looks east, toward the hills where the Romans will descend. You picture him sighing, setting down his reed pen, and muttering something that might be a prayer. Or a resignation letter. A frog croaks nearby. Probably not symbolic. But who knows? In this land, even frogs might have opinions. The sword sits awkwardly on your hip. It's ceremonial, mostly, more of a performance than a weapon. The hilt presses into your ribs every time you try to sit cross-legged, which you do often, because standing in command all day is exhausting and the ground, at least, doesn't argue back. Josephus has inherited a command he never asked for. Not like a birthright, more like a library fine someone else forgot to pay. Around him, the villages of Galilee bristle with defiance, but also confusion. Every town has its own self-appointed commander, its own secret stash of grain and grudges. Coordination is a myth, unity a nice bedtime story people mutter after their second cup of wine, and still, Rome marches. You hear them long before you see them. The distant thump of disciplined boots. The metallic creak of larica segmentata, armor that folds and breathes with terrifying grace. They say Vespasian's legions move like a single creature, one with iron skin and endless appetite. It's not a metaphor. It's just what happens when you mix engineering with ambition. Josephus tries to prepare the people of Jotapata. He inspects the walls, orders extra water stored in hidden cisterns, even organizes slingshot practice for local children. He drafts long-winded proclamations meant to rally morale. Most are ignored. You suspect he includes literary references just to feel better. Some nights, he speaks to his lieutenants in hushed tones, pacing under a fig tree. The figs are out of season, small, bitter, defensive. Like the town. Like him, a few elders still quote the prophecy of the temple never falling unless the stars change their course. Josephus, ever the rationalist, gently reminds them stars don't usually consult rebel calendars. He smiles when he says it, but it's the kind of smile you reserve for your aunt's gefilte fish, polite, pained, possibly hiding trauma. A strange rumor begins to circle. Some claim Josephus carries scroll fragments that whisper warnings in the dark. Others say he communes with the ghost of Jeremiah, who scolds him for mixing metaphors. One boy insists he saw Josephus feeding a raven by hand. It's all nonsense, of course. Probably. But in a world where dreams and disasters speak the same language, even nonsense finds believers. The siege of Jotapata begins before dawn. A horn, then silence, then the slow grind of Roman siege towers. Josephus watches from the ramparts, eyes squinting against the dust. His men are brave, tragically so. They hurl jars of oil, light bundles of thorns, shout curses in Aramaic laced with kitchen slang. For 47 days, the city holds. Food runs out, tempers run shorter. You feel the ache of exhaustion in your calves just imagining the endless climbs, the constant fear of flaming arrows, of betrayal. There's talk of spies. One man is accused of watering down the wine. A worse crime than treason, by some measures, and then, breach. It's not dramatic. No earthquakes, no lightning bolts. Just a section of wall too tired to hold on. Rome pours in like water through a crack in clay. Screams rise. Then they stop. Josephus doesn't die. He hides. In a cave, with 40 others. Trapped beneath ground and guilt, what follows is complicated. The group agrees to a suicide pact, better to die as free Jews than live as Roman trophies. Lots are drawn. Each man must kill another, until only one remains, who must fall on his own sword. It's a strange blend of honor and algebra. Josephus draws one of the last lots. But when the time comes, he hesitates. He talks. He reasons. He persuades, and he survives. Later, he claims divine vision. That God told him he was meant to live. To record the fall, to become memory's vessel. Skeptics suggest he was just better at talking than stabbing. Either way, he surrenders, and speaks to Vespasian not as a prisoner, but as a prophet. "You will be emperor," he tells him. Vespasian doesn't laugh. He doesn't arrest him either. That's the moment Josephus trades cloth for silk, sandals for scrolls. He becomes a chronicler. A translator. A man walking a threadbare line between two collapsing worlds. Years later, some will accuse him of betrayal. Others will quote him like Torah, but for now, in that quiet cave, with the blood not yet dry and history just beginning to shift its weight, he's simply a survivor. The kind who carries stories, and secrets, with the same solemn care. You wonder if he ever slept soundly after that. Or if, like you, he heard the ghosts of the others whenever the wind slipped beneath the door. You hear him before you see him, not Vespasian himself, but the hush that falls before his arrival. Like the world holds its breath when his boots hit the road. The dust swirls differently around men like him, as if even the soil recognizes ambition. The general doesn't speak much. He doesn't need to. His gaze does the work, slow, measured, the kind of look that weighs cities rather than people. You wouldn't want him inspecting your pantry, let alone your rebellion. By the time Vespasian reaches Judea, he's already worn the empire across his shoulders like a comfortable old cloak. Britain, Germania, Egypt, he's marched through their histories with clean lines and cold efficiency. Now, he's here, with his son Titus in tow and legions that move like thoughts, silent, inevitable, Roman. It's 67 CE, and the campaign begins with eerie calm. While Jerusalem debates prophecies and priestly appointments, Vespasian chooses patience. A general's kind of patience, the slow, grinding kind that wears down resolve like sandpaper on cedar. He bypasses flashy targets. Instead, he takes Galilee first. Then one town at a time, like flicking candles off a Shabbat table with methodical disrespect. He lets the rebels burn their own resources in internal squabbles. It's a strategy not unlike your great-uncle's approach to chess: do nothing flashy, wait for the opponent to argue with themselves, then nudge the king gently off the board. There's a detail no one agrees on. Some say Vespasian studied Jewish customs with genuine curiosity. Others argue he barely tolerated their peculiarities: the refusal to fight on Shabbat, the dietary laws, the fierce debates over temple taxes and celestial calendars. But everyone agrees on this: he understood that belief, not buildings, made these people tick. And he was determined to break both. Josephus, now wearing Roman robes and a slightly sheepish expression, rides behind him. He's a translator, a witness, a guest in a war he once tried to lead. His writings will later describe this part of the campaign with detached precision, but you can imagine his heart was less composed. There's a village called Tarichaea on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, known for its salted fish and stubborn inhabitants. The Romans flatten it in a day. The smell of pickled carp hangs in the air for weeks. History doesn't usually record odors, but your nose has a memory of its own. Vespasian's engineers are marvels of logistics. They build roads where goats hesitate to tread, bridges over rivers that haven't seen traffic in centuries. The legions carry siege equipment that looks like divine punishment carved from cedar and iron. If Hezekiah could see them now, he might have added a few extra verses to Psalms, maybe something rhyming with battering ram. But the strangest moment comes outside Jerusalem. Vespasian pauses, he camps, he waits, some say for strategic reasons. Others believe he's testing the city's resolve, watching for cracks to form from the inside out. And oh, do they form! Inside Jerusalem, chaos reigns. The city becomes a pot of boiling factions. Zealots in one corner, Sadducees in another, each accusing the other of blasphemy, cowardice, collaboration. Some burn food supplies to force reliance on God alone. A bold theological gamble, and, as it turns out, not a particularly filling one. Meanwhile, outside the walls, Vespasian receives a scroll. News from Rome. The Emperor Nero is dead. A brief moment of silence. Then, an eyebrow raised, a nod, and everything changes. The scholars still argue about it. Did Vespasian delay the siege because of internal Roman politics? Did he sense his destiny before the Senate proclaimed it? Or did he just enjoy making Jerusalem sweat a little longer? Regardless, he heads for Egypt to secure support. But the storm doesn't pause, it shifts. Titus, his son, steps in, Titus, who shares his father's jawline and patience, but with an edge like olive oil on a hot skillet, smooth, until it spits. Josephus remains. Part historian, part hostage, part oracle. He walks between tents at night, noting the tension, the quiet fury. You imagine him stealing moments to sketch maps in the dirt, to record names soon to be lost beneath ash. He hears the muttered curses of soldiers, the snores of men dreaming of plunder, the strange silence that always hangs before a city falls. You once heard your great-grandfather say that Roman sandals didn't just march, they erased. They don't conquer, he said, they overwrite. And yet, here, the soil resists. The stones remember. When you walk near Jerusalem's outer walls today, you can almost hear the boots. Not loud. Just, persistent. Like echoes in a family story no one dares correct, it doesn't start with fanfare. No great trumpet call. No flash of banners. Just a quiet morning in late spring, when the wind forgets to blow and the pigeons on the temple rooftops tilt their heads. Confused by the stillness, you stand atop a tower on the northern wall. The view is deceptively lovely, olive trees sway like bored rabbis, and the hills of Judea glow under the early sun like a psalm half remembered. But then you squint, and there, at the horizon's edge, a shimmer. Not water. Not heat. Armor. The legions have come. Titus marches at the head of 4 legions, disciplined, sun-scarred, and unsentimental. They say you can tell a Roman column by its breath. That synchronized exhale as the whole formation moves as one. Even the goats stop bleeding. Inside the city, chaos has already beaten them to the punch. Jerusalem, meant to be a sanctuary of holiness, now holds more factions than it does stable opinions. The zealots rule the temple. The Sicarii slit throats in alleyways. Priests try to keep the rituals going while stepping over the wounded. And ordinary families, like yours, do what Jews have always done under siege, argue about who's to blame, hide bread in unlikely places, and pray that Elijah shows up armed. The first Roman encampment goes up overnight. You smell the pitch and timber before you see the palisades. Their camp is precise, too precise. It insults the city's beautiful messiness. Titus doesn't attack immediately. He walks the perimeter, studies the walls, watches how the defenders react. His patience unnerves the factions, who had expected blood by breakfast. Instead, he offers terms: surrender, amnesty, dignity. Even, he's met with arrows, and so, the siege begins, not with shouting, but with shovels. Roman engineers dig trenches. They fell trees from nearby hills to build siege towers. They redirect water. Their machines move slowly but relentlessly, like elderly uncles arguing about parking, loud, unstoppable, and with suspiciously good aim. Inside the city, bread becomes currency. Then salt. Then rumors. Someone says Titus is secretly Jewish. Another claims the temple will levitate above the flames when the time comes. Someone else insists that a pigeon laid an egg shaped like Caesar's nose, and this must be a sign. You'd laugh, if your stomach weren't so busy echoing. Your aunt used to roast chickpeas with garlic and thyme. Now she boils shoe leather and calls it broth. Your cousin swears he saw a priest chew through parchment. No one corrects him. The parchment was from Lamentations, anyway, oddly appropriate. You remember your grandfather once telling you that when the Babylonians came, people still kept Shabbat. Lit candles. Blessed the wine, even when the cups were empty. You try to do the same now. A stub of beeswax. A whisper of shalom. The walls outside may be cracking, but somewhere, deep in the marrow, tradition flickers like an ember. A fringe superstition makes the rounds: if enough children memorize the entire book of Isaiah, the city will be spared. 12 boys are chosen. You're told one of them recited all 66 chapters in a single breathless afternoon. pausing only to sneeze somewhere near chapter 40. The sneeze is now considered part of the sacred text in some back alleys. The Romans move in tighter. One morning, they cut off the aqueducts. The next, they destroy the gardens near the Kidron Valley. By week's end, the entire northern third of the outer wall has fallen. Not with drama, just with gravity. Stones that held for centuries simply give up. Still, no one agrees to surrender. Too many leaders, not enough followers. One rebel group torches the city's remaining grain reserves. We must rely on heaven, they shout. You wonder if heaven feels the same way about them. Josephus, watching from the Roman side, sends messages over the wall. Please, really. Not as a Roman now, but as a Jew. He writes in Hebrew, quoting the prophets, reminding the defenders of history, of exile, of what happens when we forget how to compromise. No one listens. He might have had better luck tying the notes to sheep. At night, the fires begin to glow. Some are set by rebels, some by siege machines. Some by accident, some by men who say nothing is accidental anymore. Smoke curls upward like confused prayers, trapped between rooftops and sword points. You sit in the quiet, watching your city, your sanctuary, your skyline become unfamiliar. You don't cry. Not yet. Tears require energy, and hope. Instead, you trace the pattern your grandmother once stitched into your coat sleeve. A Star of David, crooked but proud, sewn in mustard thread while she hummed "O say Shalom." She used to say it kept the cold away. Now, you hope it keeps memory warm. The first real hunger doesn't feel like anything noble. There's no spiritual clarity, no dramatic collapse by a cold stone wall. Just a dull ache. A fog behind your eyes. A sudden awareness of crumbs, other people's, yours, imagined. You catch yourself staring at a corner of stale barley bread someone left on a windowsill 2 days ago. A pigeon flies off with it. You consider chasing it. You don't. Inside Jerusalem, famine sets in like an old tenant. It doesn't knock. It just moves into the bones of the city, and rearranges the furniture. You'd think siege would bring unity, that adversity would make people kinder. But Jerusalem is Jerusalem. Even at the end of the world, someone's arguing about whose fault it is. The factions are worse now. The zealots patrol the temple courts like it's their personal fortress. The Sicarii slit throats over whispered disloyalties. And the priests, what's left of them, try to keep sacrifices going, even as the altar smells increasingly of fear instead of incense. One morning, a boy in the marketplace trades a handful of raisins for a scrap of Torah parchment. Not to read, to chew. He says it tastes like wisdom. His mother smacks him, then eats some too. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. So you do neither. People begin baking soil. Mixing flour with ash. Grinding dried fig stems into something vaguely bread-shaped. Every oven becomes a shrine to desperation. You remember your mother's challah. Golden. Sweet. Braided like she believed in order. She used to sing when she kneaded the dough, a tune older than words. Now, the tune hums in your head with nothing to anchor it. Just memory and the clench of your empty stomach. A rumor spreads, a secret tunnel beneath the city leads to a forgotten granary. 3 men go looking. 2 return. The third was last seen shouting about honey jars and milk rivers. He may have found prophecy, or madness, or both. The others brought back half a radish. Meanwhile, Titus tightens the noose. His legions now encircle the city completely. No one enters. No one leaves. Roman scouts cut down fig trees for siege towers. You used to picnic under those trees. Once, your sister found a carved name on the trunk. Leah loves Eliyahu, even if he talks too much. It made her laugh for a week. Now, the trees burn. Inside, justice becomes theatrical. One man is accused of hoarding lentils. He's put on public trial by a rebel court in the women's gallery of the temple. His defense is long-winded and ends in poetry. He's acquitted, mostly because everyone forgets why he was on trial in the first place. Then there's the man named Shabtai, who claims he can survive on breath alone. He becomes a sort of local legend, meditating under a figless tree, quoting psalms in between shallow breaths. Someone offers him a fig pit as tribute. He thanks them like it's a diamond. The debate among scholars, such as they are, turns to theology. Is the famine punishment? A test? A prelude to redemption? Rabbi Eliezer insists it's birth pangs of the Messiah. Rabbi Hanina says it's indigestion caused by sin. A third rabbi says it's because no one listened to his idea about improved rainwater storage last year. Still, every Friday night, some families try a candle stub. A whispered blessing. A crust of something shared like it's manna. You gather around with neighbors you don't particularly like and hold hands just long enough to remember that you're all, unfortunately, in this together. One woman makes blessings over a clove of garlic. Her voice cracks, but not from sadness, from determination. You think of your grandmother, who used to bless the Shabbat candles even when she was too tired to stand. She'd lean against the windowsill, eyes closed, whispering the words like they held the walls in place, and maybe they did. In the streets, children play strange games, counting bones, mimicking the cries of Roman war horns, pretending to barter for imaginary olives. One girl draws a temple on the ground with chalk. When a zealot passes by, she wipes it out with her sleeve. But you notice, her fingers still trace the outline after he's gone, and somewhere, in a corner room near the southern wall, someone finds an old piece of matzah wrapped in a faded cloth. It's cracked. It smells like dust and cedar. But they lift it like it's treasure. Like it still carries the story, because it does. You can hear them arguing from the rooftops, not the Romans, but the Jews inside Jerusalem. 3 groups, 3 flags, 3 leaders who all believe they've been personally appointed to save the city. Preferably from each other, the zealots, brash and pious, clutch the temple like it's a fortress instead of a sanctuary. They speak of martyrdom the way bakers once spoke of yeast, necessary, sacred, and prone to rising unexpectedly. Then there are the Sicarii, named for their little daggers, which they keep tucked beneath cloaks and egos. They believe compromise is treason, peace is cowardice, and that anyone not currently stabbing a Roman probably deserves to be stabbed themselves. And finally, the moderates. Or what remains of them. A loose gathering of elders, priests, merchants, anyone who remembers a world before burning grain silos and prophetic graffiti. They try to make deals. The other 2 try to make examples. Jerusalem, ancient and glorious, has become a house divided, not just figuratively. Literally. The Temple Mount is barricaded from the lower city. Gates are sealed. Roads are mined. Streets echo with shouted psalms and sharper slogans. One morning, you step out to find ash on your doorstep. It isn't from Roman catapults. The zealots have torched the city's food stores. Again, why? Because dependence on food, they say, is weakness. Because if salvation is coming, it should come hungry. Because they believe, with terrifying sincerity, that if they remove every earthly crutch, heaven will finally get its act together. You imagine God looking down, mid-miracle, pausing to rub his temples. Inside the temple, sacrifices still continue. Somehow. A goat is led past a pile of broken helmets. A priest in soot-streaked linen whispers ancient prayers as mortar dust falls like snow. You wonder what the goat thinks. You wonder what the priest thinks. The scholarly debate over this chaos is long, circular, and mostly fueled by coffee centuries later. Were the zealots fanatics or patriots? Were the Sicarii liberators or lunatics? Did the moderates truly exist, or were they just an invention of later historians who needed someone to root for? Josephus, watching from outside, writes bitterly of the infighting. He calls it the true downfall, not Roman strength, but Jewish division. You suspect he wrote that line with a clenched jaw and more than a little guilt. Still, some oddities survive. A baker named Dov refuses to leave his shop, even as arrows whistle past. He continues to knead dough from acorn flour and crushed weeds, baking lopsided rolls that smell like memories. He hands them out to children in exchange for stories. His wall is covered in childish drawings, the temple, the sea, a suspiciously handsome version of Dov himself. One girl swears she saw Elijah in the marketplace, arguing with a zealot over fig prices. She claims the prophet winked at her before vanishing into a spice cart. The drawing she makes of him shows a man with thick eyebrows, one sandal, and a bag of lentils. No one dares say it wasn't him. You cling to small things. A shard of pottery with your uncle's initials. The faint outline of the Shema etched into a doorframe. The way your neighbor still braids her hair for Shabbat, even though there's no oil left to light a single flame. One night, the three factions do something unimaginable. They unite, but only to repel an internal uprising of citizens who want to surrender the city. The alliance lasts 12 hours and ends with a riot in the temple courtyard and several prophetic declarations shouted from rooftops. You duck behind a barrel and wonder if this is what the psalmist meant by a time for war and a time for peace. Maybe he forgot to add, and a time for extremely loud and confusing theological disputes. Your grandmother used to say that when Jews fight among themselves, even the angels argue in heaven. You imagine them now, flustered, exhausted, filing divine paperwork and muttering about factionalism. Still, even amid the smoke, the city holds a strange beauty. You catch a glimpse of the temple at sunset, golden stones reflecting the firelight, its silhouette regal and trembling. A group of boys stands in awe, silent for once. One of them whispers, maybe the Mashiach will still come. No one laughs, then the horn blows, not the Roman one. A shofar. Weak, cracked, but unmistakable, someone, somewhere, is still calling to heaven, and even if heaven hasn't answered, yet, the echo clings to the stones like hope too stubborn to leave, in a damp cave under the scorched hills of Jotapata. 40 men whisper like ghosts who haven't yet accepted their dead. You can smell the stone here, wet, cold, old enough to remember when these hills were still vineyards instead of battlegrounds. Josephus sits among them, unshaven, hollow-eyed, clinging to his intellect like it's the last item not yet looted. Outside, the Romans search the rubble. Inside, the air is thick with breath, dust, and a decision no one wants to make. The siege of Jotapata had ended days earlier. The walls collapsed. The fighting turned to slaughter. Josephus had vanished like smoke through a gap in the earth, a trick of tunnels, perhaps, or a stroke of desperate fortune. With him are the last survivors. Hiding among damp roots and prayers, but hiding is a temporary strategy. Roman torches now comb the countryside. Capture is certain. And with it, crucifixion. The men look to Josephus. He's the scholar, the commander, the one who spoke confidently of divine plans and national destiny. Now they ask him to help write their final act, a suicide pact, draw lots. One man kills the next. Down the line, one by one, until only one remains, and he, too, must fall. Josephus nods slowly. Perhaps he even agrees out loud. But inside, a war wages fiercer than any outside. You can almost hear it, scrolls unrolling in his mind, verses colliding, Talmudic dilemmas forming mid-panic. The draw begins. The first man steps forward, blade in hand, voice shaking with borrowed courage. And then the next. And the next, until it's Josephus, and one other, the last two. He speaks softly. Eloquently. His voice is low, rhythmic, familiar, like your uncle telling a story too late at night. He reasons. He pleads. He reframes. Is it not better, he might say, that one should live to preserve the tale? A convenient theology, perhaps. Or maybe, in that moment, it's revelation. He persuades the other man. Somehow. Whether with rhetoric or tears, we'll never know. The sources disagree. Josephus himself, when he finally writes about it, smooths the wrinkles. But the point remains, he lives. The next day, he is brought before Vespasian, dust still clings to his robe. His voice is cracked. His sandals have long lost their dignity. But he bows, not as a defeated enemy, but as a prophet. You will be emperor, he says, a bold claim. Suicidal, really, unless you're right, and Vespasian doesn't scoff. He's a superstitious man, in the Roman way. Omens matter. Prophecies carry weight. He lets Josephus live, shackled, watched, but alive. From here, the story turns. Josephus is no longer rebel, but translator, historian, mediator between a crumbling Jewish world and an expanding Roman one. The scholarly debate over this moment is endless. Was Josephus a coward? A traitor? A genius of survival? Did he manipulate fate, or did it simply trip over him on the way to someone else? There's a fringe theory that the lot drawing was rigged, that Josephus, with a mathematician's mind, placed himself to survive. Statistically possible. Morally ambiguous. Historically fascinating. Your great-uncle Moshe used to say, never trust a man who writes history and lived through it. But he also believed cats could smell sin, so grain of salt. Josephus adopts Roman robes. Learns Latin. Dines with generals. All while composing, in Greek, a record of the war that destroyed his people. His sentences carry the weight of stone tablets, but occasionally, just occasionally, you sense regret beneath the grammar. He never returns to Jerusalem, perhaps by choice. Perhaps by banishment. Perhaps because, once you watch your home burn, going back feels like breaking something all over again, and yet, he writes, he tells the story, not just of swords and sieges, but of arguments and ashes. Of rebels and rabbis. Of what happens when a people too proud to kneel also refuse to bend. Some call him Yosef ben Mattatyahu. Others, Flavius Josephus. You think of him as the man in the cave, staring at a blade, choosing a pen. You imagine him older now, sitting by a Roman window, watching olive trees sway in a foreign breeze. Maybe he hums a tune his mother once sang while crushing garlic. Maybe he dreams of Jerusalem, still golden in memory, still unfinished. Maybe, and this is the quietest maybe of all, he wonders if the temple stones remember his name. It waits, still and patient, just as it did in Babylon, just as it did in Egypt, and before that, in Canaan. History has never needed to rush. Titus sets up camp on the Mount of Olives. From there, the whole of Jerusalem lies before him, rooftops like cracked pottery. Smoke rising from alleys, the golden gleam of the temple catching the sun as if defying siege by sheer radiance. You've seen this view before, but not like this. Not under the gaze of Rome. The Roman standard flutters behind him. The Aquila, the eagle, carved in brass, outstretched wings catching the wind, unblinking. You imagine it almost breathing. Jews aren't supposed to look upon graven images, but it's hard not to notice this one. It watches. It judges. It waits. Titus surveys the city like a builder eyeing a cracked foundation. He walks the ridgelines, talks to his engineers in curt Latin, nods occasionally. He doesn't shout. That's the Roman way, quiet confidence sharpened on other people's borders. Inside the city, the infighting continues. The zealots control the temple. The moderates control nothing. The Sicarii control panic. One faction builds a barricade in the court of the women. Another burns it down before nightfall. There's no consensus on whether the Messiah is late, disguised, or already arrested, and through it all, the sacrifices continue. Yes, somehow, the priests still climb the altar each morning. Still offer lambs, their hands trembling slightly. The wood for the fire is scarce now. More ash than flame. But the rituals persist. You can smell the faint tang of smoke, the iron of blood, the old cedar soaked with generations of longing. A Roman spy, disguised as a peddler, brings back a report. They still sing psalms, he says. They still believe. Titus frowns. He brings in siege engines, catapults, towers, ballistae. They rise like skeletal trees at the city's edge. One looks eerily like a menorah, if you squint. A very deadly menorah. The irony is not lost on anyone, except maybe the engineers. You recall the odd folktale your neighbor used to tell, about King Solomon trapping demons in clay jars and burying them beneath the temple. When the Romans dig She said, those jars will crack. The spirits will rise, furious and unshaven. Honestly, after what you've seen this year, it sounds plausible. A child in the upper city claims to see angels in the sky, flaming swords drawn, waiting for a signal. Others see buzzards. Interpretations vary. Titus offers surrender again. He sends Josephus to the walls. Dressed in Roman linen, holding a scroll, he shouts up to the defenders in Hebrew. Pleads. Quotes Isaiah. Implores them to yield, to save what can still be saved. They throw a spear at his head. He ducks, just barely. The scroll flutters to the dust. You imagine him sighing. Not the dramatic sigh of betrayal. The long, slow exhale of a man who no longer expects logic from the living. Scholars still debate whether Titus wanted to destroy the temple. Some say no, that he admired its architecture, its legacy, its stubbornness. Others say he saw it as the heart of resistance, pulsing with zeal and defiance, and knew it had to be silenced. One Roman officer, reportedly sympathetic, likens Jerusalem to a woman in labor, trembling, howling, impossible to ignore. Something will be born from this, he mutters. Or die trying. From the Mount of Olives, you can see the walls buckling. They don't fall yet, not quite. But they lean inward, like the city is folding into itself. You hear the occasional crash, the shouting, the sudden silence that follows when people realize which building just collapsed, and still, the temple gleams. Polished limestone. Gold trim. It catches the sunset like it's performing, like it believes, somehow, that its beauty can negotiate peace. You once visited with your father. He made you touch the stones. Not just to remember, he said, but so they remember you. You wonder if they do. That night, the Romans light torches along the entire perimeter. They don't attack. They just illuminate. The whole city glows red, as if caught in a sunset that won't end. From a rooftop in the old city, a small group gathers. They sing. Quietly. A psalm of ascent, the words drift toward the mount. Titus hears something. He asks what it is. Josephus tells him. Titus doesn't respond. Just stares a moment longer at the temple. At the firelight reflected in its gilded doors, then he turns away. The eagle remains. It begins, not with a thunderclap, not with an earthquake, but with the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. A groan. A final protest from a world that knows its ending. The temple gates are breached. Not all at once, no, that would be too clean. It happens like a nightmare unfolding in reverse, the outer courtyard swallowed by soldiers, the inner court tainted by sandals never meant to tread there. Roman boots where only Levites once walked. Blood where once there was oil. You hear the screams, sharp, then muffled. Then something worse, silence. The kind of silence that follows a scream when even the air wants to look away. Titus, by some accounts, had ordered restraint. Preserve the temple. It's a marvel, even by Roman standards. An architectural defiance of time and gravity. But the soldiers don't listen. Or can't. Or won't. One torch, it's always one. Thrown, dropped. Perhaps even knocked loose in the crush of men and panic. Flame meets curtain. Smoke meets cedar. And the second temple, the very heart of Jewish time and space, begins to burn. You remember your mother once telling you that when a house burns, the first thing to go is not the walls, but the stories in the air, the little memories floating between rafters. The way your cousin once sneezed during Kiddush. The joke your uncle made that no one understood but everyone laughed at anyway. Those things leave first. The temple is full of those stories, and now, they flee. You can see it from the rooftops, gold melting, timber collapsing, priests crying out. Some leap into the flames rather than see the Holy of Holies defiled. One carries a jar of oil, clutched like an infant. Another dies blowing the silver trumpet, not for battle, but for the new moon, as if the calendar might still matter. The stones crack. Yes, stones. And this is where language fails, because something does cry out, not in words. Not in human voice. But in the wrenching sound of a place that's been holy for too long to go quietly. The walls groan as if they've absorbed centuries of prayer, and now, denied a future, they release it all at once. You hear it. You feel it in your teeth. Josephus, from the Roman side, watches with what might be tears. He writes later of priests burned alive, of the veil torn, of fire climbing the golden vines that once adorned the gate like commandments in bloom. He does not write about the smell. You smell it, burnt cedar, scorched linen, and something else, older. Like dust soaked in grief. Like the pages of a lost scroll turning themselves to ash in mid-blessing, there's an ancient superstition your great-grandmother believed, that if the temple ever falls, every child born that day will speak prophecy in reverse. No one knows what that means. But a baby does cry as the eastern wall crumbles, and an old man near the Siloam pool swears he hears her whisper Ezekiel. Backwards, one soldier finds the menorah. He hoists it, laughing. It catches the firelight like a joke told too soon. They carry it away. Eventually, it ends up carved into marble in Rome, a trophy etched into history, where it cannot weep. Others dig through the ruins, seeking gold. The temple's gold had melted, seeped between stones. So they pry apart the floor itself. One by one. Tearing up sacred foundation for coins they'll gamble away by morning, and here's the cruelest detail of all, it was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of AV, the very same day the first temple had fallen. You wonder who remembered first. Which priest, mid-scream or prayer or flame, realized the symmetry. That time had looped around to finish what it once began. That lamentation wasn't history, it was recurrence. The scholarly debate, and oh, they still debate, is whether this was fate or just a terrible coincidence. Whether God turned away or we turned inward. Whether destruction was divine punishment, Roman power, or a slow unraveling from within, but for those inside the walls, it wasn't theory. It was heat. It was firelight flickering across the face of a boy clutching a half-burnt Torah scroll. It was mothers covering children's eyes not from violence, but from despair. Your grandmother used to say, if the temple falls, let your heart remember how it stood. She'd trace her fingers over the kitchen wall, over cracks she called Jerusalem lines. Said if you listened close, you could hear the stones breathing. Tonight, you do, they whisper, even in collapse. Even in ash. Even as smoke swallows stars, they say, never again, until again. They say, tell them we stood. And most haunting of all, they say nothing at all, because sometimes, silence is the last prayer we have. They say the Holy of Holies held no image, just emptiness, an emptiness so sacred, it could stop your breath if you got too close. A space where heaven dipped its finger into earth. A room only the high priest could enter, and only on Yom Kippur, and only if his sins didn't outweigh the incense. Now that sacred space smells like burning cedar, the curtain, that massive parachute separating the holy from everything else, catches fire first. It doesn't go up in a flash. No, it sighs into flame. Slowly. Like it knows this is the last performance, and wants to take a bow, the fire moves with purpose. You hear it before you see it, a low rushing, like wind with teeth. Gold begins to warp. Carvings blister. The floor glows. This place was designed to hold eternity. And eternity, as it turns out, is extremely flammable. The priests try. Some carry water. Others just stand still, whispering verses too soft for history to hear. One tosses himself into the flames, not in despair, but as if to offer his body in place of what's burning. He doesn't scream. The silence is worse. Some say the ark was never there, that it disappeared centuries ago, hidden, taken, or simply gone. Scholars still debate. Did the Second Temple even have an ark? Was the Holy of Holies just emptiness? Divine absence wrapped in gold? Your grandfather had a theory, it's still there, he'd say, peeling potatoes. But it's turned invisible out of shame. You thought he was joking, until he cried. A Roman soldier stumbles back, eyes wide. He swears he saw two angels above the burning altar, not statues. Not gold. Wings. Eyes. Fire. Titus tells him to lay off the wine, and then, the roof collapses. It happens fast. A deep cracking, like thunder pulling at the earth, and then a roar. Stone falls like rain. Gold peels like bark. The chamber that once housed the divine presence becomes dust. Somewhere, a child cries for the first time all day, and far away, in some quiet Galilean village, a woman baking barley bread pauses. She doesn't know why, but her hands stop moving. Her eyes sting. She turns down the flame, just a little. They say the fire was accidental. That Titus wanted the temple spared, a jewel for the empire. Others say the order was given with a nod and a shrug. Let them see who rules their God now. Josephus claims Titus was furious. Tore his robe. Shouted at his troops. But Josephus also claimed a lot of things, including that he survived a suicide pact by divine math. You take it with a pinch of salt, and maybe a second pinch for good measure. Still, he writes this moment carefully. As if afraid the ink itself might burn, and you try to look away. But your eyes don't obey. There, in the flickering smoke, the past curls in on itself. You see generations of light, of candles lit and tears shed and lambs offered and songs sung. All of it now hanging in the air like breath on a winter morning. Your grandmother used to face Jerusalem when she prayed. Even when peeling carrots. Even when yelling at your cousin for stealing matzah early. Her eyes would drift east, and she'd whisper, "Bring us back." You never asked where she meant. Now you know, someone, it's not clear who, starts singing. Not a wail. Not a dirge. A melody you remember from second-grade Torah class. The one about returning to Zion. You hum along before realizing, the melody doesn't stop the fire, but it keeps you from vanishing. It doesn't look like much, just a corner of parchment, singed at the edges, curled like a leaf in autumn. You almost miss it among the blackened stone and twisted bronze. But then the wind turns, just slightly, and the Hebrew catches the light, faded ink, still defiant. You kneel, the letters are from Leviticus, or maybe Deuteronomy. Hard to tell, some are missing. One is blurred by what looks like a thumbprint. Ash clings to the fibers like soot-laced tzitzit. You don't dare touch it. Not because it might fall apart, but because it might not. Your grandfather used to say that if you dropped a holy book, you kissed it before picking it up. That Torah scrolls had memory. That they forgave, slowly, but sincerely. The smell around you is a strange mix, burnt olive oil, singed wool, and old dust awakened by catastrophe. It's not quite unpleasant. Just ancient. Like the air itself is remembering something. You imagine the scroll's last reader, a scribe, maybe, or a boy practicing Haftarah by candlelight. Did he pause on that very word now peeking through the ash? Did he stumble on a letter and laugh, or sigh? A Roman soldier steps nearby, muttering to himself. He doesn't notice the fragment. Just walks on, dragging his spear, knocking over a half-melted brass menorah as he passes. You flinch. The scroll stays. You lean closer. There's a debate, there always is, about whether any scroll survived the temple's destruction. Some say none did, that every parchment became smoke. Others whisper of scrolls smuggled out by desperate priests, hidden in jugs, buried in valleys, wrapped in prayer and linen. A fringe theory claims one scroll was carried out beneath a Roman's cloak, not looted, but rescued. The scholar who wrote that was laughed out of his post. But he kept researching until the day he died. Quietly, persistently, like a man chasing a whisper. The parchment before you isn't whole. But it's enough to read a verse, enough to remember a rhythm, enough to say aloud, shakily, words your mouth hasn't formed since the city had gates. You shall be holy, for I the Lord your God am holy. You pause. A few feet away, a woman clutches a wooden spoon. It's broken. She isn't cooking. She just holds it. Maybe it belonged to her mother. Maybe it's all she has left. She sees you crouching and nods. Not in greeting. In recognition, you're both holding fragments. A man across the rubble mumbles a blessing before drinking muddy water from a cracked bowl. Another wraps a shred of blue fabric around his wrist like tefillin. He isn't praying, just holding. Somehow, people are still here, still humming. Still saying Baruch over scraps. Still looking east when there's nothing left east but smoke. You think of the bedtime stories your grandmother told. About the scrolls that could cry if neglected. About one rabbi who kissed his Talmud page each night before sleep, because what if it dreams of you? You'd laugh then. Now you're not so sure. The wind shifts again. The scroll flutters once, then settles. You resist the urge to pocket it. Not because you fear being caught, but because some things aren't taken. They're remembered. Left exactly where they were found, so others can believe they were real. Later, they'll say the temple was made of gold, but you'll remember this, a single half-burnt verse, lying in dust, whispering that holiness doesn't end where fire begins. It takes a while for silence to settle. Not the silence of awe or reverence, but the kind that comes after the screaming ends. The kind that feels thick in your ears, like the world has drawn a curtain. Jerusalem is no longer a city, it's a smoldering memory stitched together by broken walls, overturned carts, and the sound of sandals crunching on soot. A Roman patrol walks by. Their armor glints like nothing ever burned here. They laugh at something, maybe a joke, maybe just the relief of survival. It doesn't matter. It echoes too loudly. You pass a fig tree. It still stands, somehow. Leaves singed. One green fruit clings stubbornly to the branch. You pluck it, but it tastes of smoke. In the valley, lines of prisoners shuffle under guard. Some are bound for labor. Some for death. Some for far-off cities where their names will be mispronounced and their children will be told to forget the mountain they came from. The word exile feels too polite. This is not just leaving, it's being unmade. You once believed the land would keep you. That no matter what, the soil would remember your name. But the earth is quiet now. And you're not sure if that quiet is mourning. Or indifference. They say 10 measures of sorrow were poured into the world, and Jerusalem drank 9. Somewhere near the old marketplace, a man kneels in the ashes, carefully arranging pebbles. 5 in a row, then 3 across, then 1 in the center. A child asks what he's doing. He says, remembering the floor of the temple. The child shrugs. Plays nearby. Later, you'll see her do the same. This is how memory starts, not with monuments, but with patterns. Josephus writes from his Roman villa now. Dictating in Greek. He writes of destruction, of courage, of fire. But he also writes of arguments, of false messiahs, of infighting. He names names. He omits others. His history is long, precise, and still somehow incomplete. Scholars today argue about his tone. Was he justifying Rome? Accusing Jerusalem? Trying to build a bridge between two worlds already ash? Or was he simply writing to be remembered, not forgiven? Your great-uncle once claimed Josephus wasn't a traitor, just a man who saw the fire and chose the pen. Besides, he'd mutter, we've all had to grovel once or twice. Even Moses lost his temper. A donkey brays in the distance, as if disagreeing. Back in the city, someone lights a candle, not for Shabbat, it's the middle of the week, but just because the dark has become too loud. The flame is small, unsteady. But it catches. A second light appears in another window. Then another. There are no prayers, not yet. Just breath. Just presence. But presence, now, is resistance. The stories shift. At first, people whisper of what they saw. I was there, by the eastern gate. My cousin held the parachute before it burned. But as the days pass, the stories begin to soften. A new voice enters, the voice of metaphor, of midrash. The stones didn't fall, they wept. The fire didn't consume, it cleansed. The temple wasn't destroyed, it ascended. None of it is historically precise, all of it is true. A child, the same one from before, asks why God didn't stop it. Her father says nothing. Just takes her hand and traces the shape of the letter Shin in the dirt. He's still here, he says. Just quieter. You remember your grandmother brushing crumbs from the table after Havdalah. 3 swipes, always the same direction. She said it was to send the blessings out into the week. But now, you wonder, maybe it was her way of sweeping away loss, making room for hope, because even after exile, laundry must be done. Bread must be baked. Stories must be told. You don't stop being a people just because the world insists you're finished, you just get quieter. And deeper, like a river underground. There is no mountain, no priesthood, no incense curling toward heaven in solemn spirals, and yet. You still lay the cloth gently. You smooth the creases the way your mother once did, humming something tuneless but familiar. You set the table not with gold or silver, but with care. 1 chipped bowl. 2 cups that don't match. Bread that didn't rise quite right. Holy enough, somewhere between survival and habit, the table has become something else. A small altar. A stage for memory. A place where absence is made livable. This is the world after the fall. You're not in Jerusalem anymore, you haven't been in years, but the rhythm of the days remains. Friday comes, and something stirs. Not hope, exactly. More like a responsibility handed down with the lentils. You light 2 candles, even if they're just wax stubs in old olive jars. You cover the bread, even if it's dry. You say the blessings. Quietly, yes. But clearly, and for that moment, it's not exile. It's Shabbat, they say the rabbis met in Yavne. That when the smoke cleared and the temple lay in ruin, a handful of scholars gathered and asked the most Jewish question of all, now what? What they did next was, unexpected. They didn't rebuild altars, they built arguments, halacha, prayer, cycles of mourning and rejoicing, all reimagined for a world with no center, no walls, no smoke. Where the presence of God had to squeeze into homes. Into pages, into the awkward silence between blessings, there's a Talmudic opinion, and yes, it's contested, that the family table atones just like the altar did. That slicing a loaf, pouring a cup, welcoming a guest, these are not rituals about dinner. These are sacrifices. Elevated. Portable. Resistant to conquest, you think of your grandmother's table, scarred from hot pans. Etched with initials from bored children. Covered in mismatched dishes and gossip. But always, always, a white cloth on Friday night. She said it was like dressing the altar. Your uncle rolled his eyes, and then folded the corners just right. There's a joke your father used to tell, the Romans destroyed the temple. We turned it into a side dish. He'd say it while making kugel, like some absurd tribute. But when he set that pan down on the table, he'd whisper the hamatzi like it still echoed against marble walls. In that space, between the joke and the prayer, something survived. Even the sages debated what was lost and what could be moved. The Shema? Keep it. The sacrifices? Rewrite them in words. The Ark of the Covenant? Still missing. Likely to remain that way. But justice, mercy, ritual, these could travel. These could live in linen drawers and childhood songs and the stubbornness of Jewish kitchens. Somewhere in Alexandria, a family sets a table for Shabbat. In Babylonia, a merchant recites Birkat Hamazon over dried figs and river water wine. In Rome, beneath a fresco of their own defeat, a woman lights candles and tells her child a story, about a place she's never seen, but knows by heart. They say God wept when the temple fell, but maybe he also smiled the first time someone said Shabbat Shalom in exile, and meant it. Because the miracle isn't that we kept the Sabbath. It's that the Sabbath kept us. By now, the ashes have settled, the streets no longer hiss with heat. The smell of burning has faded to something fainter, more like old parchment than charred wood. But the emptiness? That lingers. It curls beneath your ribcage, where songs used to sit. you're somewhere outside the city now. A camp, maybe. Or a line of captives snaking toward the horizon. No one says the word exile. That would require breath, and most of it is being used for walking. Heads down. Sandals fraying. Hope held together by instinct, but then, someone hums, you don't notice at first. It's soft, almost an accident. A few rising notes, uncertain, like a memory knocking on the wrong door. Then someone else joins. A woman, maybe. Then a child, it's Shalom Aleichem. Not sung the way it was in Jerusalem, with polished voices, wine, and pressed linen. This version is dusty, cracked. But it's still Shalom Aleichem. The angels may not find you in this camp, but the melody does. That's the thing about customs, they're sneaky, they survive in whispers, in muscle memory, in the way your hand still reaches to cover the hallah even when there's no table. You find yourself mouthing blessings over bitter roots and dry beans, because your grandfather did, and his grandfather before him, and they weren't exactly dining at the palace either. A young boy draws a Star of David in the dirt with a stick. A Roman soldier kicks it aside. The boy waits. Then draws it again. This time smaller, tucked between two stones. He doesn't cry. He just waits for the next chance. There's a myth, a curious one, passed between prisoners like breadcrumbs, that Elijah the prophet still walks among the captives. Disguised, of course, maybe as an old man with a limp, maybe as a mute girl who never blinks. One woman claims he gave her an extra figure. Another swears he whispered, "Don't forget to light." It's absurd. And entirely believable, because someone does light. In the corner of a work tent, behind a basket of spoiled dates, an old woman guards a shard of wax. It's barely enough for a stub of a flame. But she places 2 pebbles beside it, her stand-in for candles, and whispers the blessing. Eyes closed. Shoulders trembling just once, no one mocks her. Even the guards pretend not to see. The scholarly debate, long after, becomes this: when did Judaism shift? When did temple worship become table ritual? When did the grand altar become the family hearth? The debate is old, unending, and occasionally exhausting, but you know the answer: it happened here. In moments like this, where people clung not to gold, but to rhythm. Not to place, but to practice. Not to what was burned, but to what could still be sung. Your cousin once joked that Jews would keep Shabbat in a cave, with a stolen candle and a potato cut in half. You laughed then. Now, you realize, it wasn't a joke. It was prophecy. Someone tells a story about a rabbi in chains who used his daily ration of oil not for cooking, but to light a single wick on Friday night. He said, "Let my soul be hungry, but not forget." Another smuggles a piece of parchment, just a blessing, nothing more, and reads it aloud in the mornings, eyes scanning the letters like their food, and somehow, this doesn't feel like the end, even with the temple gone, even with Jerusalem in ruins. Because here, in this camp, beneath the watchful eyes of a foreign god and a foreign emperor, someone still hums a Shea Chael. Off-key. Through cracked lips, and somewhere in the heavens, perhaps the angels, if they're not too shocked, hum along. You don't rebuild a temple in one night, but you do start with a song. It's a quiet one, hummed more than sung, really, the kind of tune that wavers as it travels between generations. Your grandmother used to hum it while braiding hallah, though she always denied it. "I don't sing," she'd say, right before humming again. The melody was older than her, older than the synagogue, maybe older than hope itself. Tonight, someone sings it by candlelight. No sanctuary. No choir. Just a low wooden table, 3 potatoes, and a child with sticky fingers reciting Modeh Ani like it's the first time anyone's ever said thank you. Outside, the world forgets. Empires rise, coins are minted, statues polished. They tell their own stories, of conquest, of logic, of marble perfection. But here, in this corner of exile, a crust of bread is passed from hand to hand like a relic. A tear is wiped before it has a chance to fall. A blessing is whispered, Not because God needs reminding, but because you do. The ashes from the temple. They're not gone. Not entirely, they show up in strange places, a crack in your neighbor's doorway that faces Jerusalem by accident, a thread of black in a wedding canopy, a pause in the middle of Shehecheyanu when no one can quite remember the words. Some families, to this day, leave a patch of wall unpainted in their homes, a square of bare plaster, near the entrance, near the table. It's not about sadness. It's about truth. A gentle, stubborn truth. We remember what was lost, but we still come in. We still sit. We still bless. Scholars debate what fueled the resilience, whether it was ritual, law, memory, sheer defiance, or just a talent for holy sarcasm. We'll rebuild, one sage supposedly said, but let's start with soup. Another replied, and maybe smaller stones. You still remember the warmth of your grandmother's kitchen, that uncanny mix of cinnamon, onion, and something like safety. How she'd bless the candles with her eyes closed, hands circling the flame like she was wrapping the world in a shawl. You didn't understand the words then, but you understood the hush that followed. The holiness of after. Now, the hush lives in you. It appears when you set a table, when you press your lips to mezuzah wood, when you look at your child and see your great-grandfather's eyebrows staring back, when you cry during Lakah Dodi and pretend it's just the melody getting to you. You don't need the temple to return, because somehow, without blueprint or builder, it followed you. Into exile. Into kitchens. Into prayers muttered in hospital hallways and songs hummed in taxi cabs and the creak of a wooden floor during Havdalah. You are what remained, you are what rose, and when you bless your children, you press your hand gently to their heads, just like your grandmother did, and whisper words she taught you, even if you never quite understood them until now. The words are quiet, but the stones hear them. And this time, they do not cry, they rest, because you remembered, because you kept singing, because the temple may have fallen, but you still stand. Let your breath slow now, the stories have been told, the candles flicker low, and the echoes of ancient footsteps have settled into stillness. You've walked through dust and flame, through gates that no longer stand, through melodies hummed across generations, and still, here you are, not in a palace. Not in a temple, but in a quiet room, with memory. The journey didn't end in fire, it continued in silence, in survival, in the careful folding of tablecloths, in blessings whispered over lentils, in lullabies sung in exile with accents borrowed from a dozen lands. And maybe, tonight, you can feel it, the pulse of something older than grief, not triumph, not even comfort, just the steady, stubborn rhythm of return. You've heard stones speak, you've watched scrolls smolder, you've felt the presence of those who came before, even if they only appeared in the way a word catches in your throat or a gesture passes through your hands. Somehow, through it all, a people remembered how to bless. So wherever you are now, under a roof of tile or tin, alone or near someone sleeping, let that blessing linger, let it soften the edges of your day, let it hold you, gently, as the night deepens. And if, in your dreams, you find yourself walking toward a walled city, or a flickering candle, or a grandmother humming over bread, just follow. The temple never left, it's been in your footsteps all along.